Peter Dutton is channeling Ronald Reagan's famous challenge to Jimmy Carter in 1980. The times have changed, but the issues remain the same. Ronald Reagan, in the presidential debate 45 years ago, asked voters these very simple questions.
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago?
Those questions helped deliver Reagan a landslide victory, because the most critical issue to any voter at any time is providing for their family and their family's prosperity and security. That never changes. And it's what this upcoming federal election boils down to as well. Well, Peter Dutton today called on the Prime Minister to apologise to Australians for breaking his promise that they'd be better off under his government.
My questions to the Prime Minister. Under this weak Albanese Labor government, interest rates have increased 12 times, energy bills have risen by $1,000, living standards have collapsed, 27,000 businesses have gone insolvent, and we're in a record-breaking household recession. Will the Prime Minister now apologise for promising Australians they would be better off and admit that they can't afford another 3 years of this weak Albanese Labor government?
Of course, there was no apology. There never will be. Now, there's no question that in focus group research, cost of living is the top issue all day, every day. And on this topic, Albanese has breached the trust of Australian voters. Last election, as you know, he made solving the cost of living crisis his campaign mantra.
Cost of living increases, cost of living pressures, cost of living, cost of living, cost of living, the cost of living, cost of living, cost of everything, cost of living issues. Bear in mind the cost of living pressures.
Albanese squarely blamed Scott Morrison for the cost of living crisis, despite the fact at that point in time there'd only been a single rate rise. Yet now that he's Prime Minister, and there's been a dozen rate rises during his time in office, he takes no responsibility. Now, this is illogical. It was Morrison's fault back then, but it's not Albanese's fault now. Before the last election, Albanese promised a new era of transparency, and he pledged to own up to his mistakes.
That if I get something wrong, I'll own up to it.
Yet have we seen him own up to anything? Just one thing? Of course not. It's always someone else's fault, especially the cost of living crisis, which is because of overseas factors, the Middle East war, Ukraine, and now Donald Trump. No one mentioned homegrown inflation. And Albanese wouldn't answer either of these following questions today in Parliament.
Prime Minister, by what percentage has the cost of food increased since the election of the Albanese Labor government?
Can the Prime Minister provide a single example of an Australian family that has received a $275 cut to their power bill, as was promised before the last election nearly 100 times?
The Prime Minister just hopes these questions will all go away if he keeps insisting that everything is looking great. Optimism, as I told you last night, is his new phrase.
We do need hope and we need optimism, and as we begin the parliamentary year, that's precisely what I have. Optimism for the year ahead and optimism that we can create a better future for Australia.
But voters aren't feeling so optimistic. Families are feeling the pain, which is cumulative. The Albanese government is well aware the cost of living crisis is the single most critical issue to mainstream Australians. It's why Albanese is desperate for a rate cut. And if he gets one at the next RBA board meeting, it may prompt him to call the election. The RBA meets on the 18th of February and the 1st of April, and then again in late May. Economist Judith Sloan wrote last week that despite Albanese and Chalmers saying they respect the independence of the RBA, a lot of nudging has been going on for some time. She writes, when Chalmers declared last year that high interest rates were smashing the economy, he was, in effect, telling the bank what to do. And here was Chalmers making that very point.
The combination of global economic uncertainty and higher interest rates is smashing household budgets and slowing our economy considerably.
Now, that might have been a subtle hint, but some current and former Labor politicians and also union leaders have been far more direct as rates rose over the past couple of years.
We're outside the Reserve Bank of Australia today, and that's because working people are urging them to cut interest rates.
Now we have headline inflation right in the middle of the RBA's target band, which gives them maximum room to move in terms of bringing interest rates down. Of course, that decision is up to the independent Reserve Bank.
The Reserve Bank is putting economic dogma over rational economic decision making, hammering households, hammering mums and dads with higher rates, causing a collapse in spending and driving the economy backwards.
Now, the rates decision by the RBA in February and April will put its independence to the test. Its thinking, reflected through the board minutes, will be under the spotlight. There's no question Michelle Bullock is under considerable pressure to bring down rates before the election. She's Labor's appointee after all, and there's a lot riding on this rates decision. As far as the Prime Minister is concerned, well, he thinks it could mean the difference between him winning or not. But even if the rates come down and Albanese promises life will be more affordable, well, who would believe him this time? He's like the boy who cried wolf. He's lost the trust of voters. Yet Albanese keeps insisting, privately and publicly, that he's on track to win government, despite the polls clearly trending in Dutton's direction. The Australian's Jeff Chambers wrote that the Prime Minister is immersed in self-belief. Well, I'd call it self-delusion. Like with The Voice, he thought Australians loved him and loved his vision, but they rejected him and they rejected The Voice. This election is a repeat. Albanese is insisting that voters really like him. They think he's a nice guy, even as they desert him and his weak leadership. In truth, Albanese has no reason to be confident. When he won the election last time, it was with one of Labor's worst primary votes in Australian history, despite the chaos of the coalition era. And Labor's appeal has only catapulted since then. And Albanese's own personal appeal is at its lowest level. His net favourability is as low as Scott Morrison's was prior to the 2022 election. As the polls show, and as we all know anecdotally, the momentum is now in Dutton's favour. And he is feeling, Peter Dutton, cautiously optimistic while acknowledging the hard road ahead.
I am ready for the election. I believe it'll be tough. It'll be always hard fought, but I do believe that we can win, and that will be a decision for the Australian people.
The election, not yet called, but Dutton is already treating this like it's the election campaign, fronting the media every day. Meanwhile, we know Albanese has one eye on retirement, his wedding to Jodie and the clifftop mansion he bought with her in Copacabana. Albanese was never personally desperate to become Prime Minister. He didn't believe it was his one and only destiny in the same way that other leaders have always believed it was theirs. Albanese has one foot out the door already. And it's why, if he does lose the election, it's unlikely he'd fall into a bitter depression like Prime Ministers past, because the job meant the world to them. For Albanese, this was an unexpected ascension to the top job for a radical left-wing political activist. And our country is the worse for it.